The Edmonton Oilers were awfully busy on day one of NHL free agency. We've got a whole lot to dive into. Let's get to work, Oilers fans.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. Been doing NHL content online for almost 10 years now. And before we get to today's jam-packed NHL free agency show, I want to thank everybody who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Whole lot to get to today. The Oilers were very busy on day one of free agency, signed quite a few familiar faces, brought in two very interesting faces as well. So that'll be our first segment. We'll touch everybody the Oilers took care of over the last few days. Segment number two, we'll talk about free agency at large around the league, some of the trends, some of the big philosophies, some takeaways. And then the last segment, unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about Stan Bowman because the Oilers have been linked to the disgraced former Chicago Blackhawks general manager. So we'll wrap up the show on that sour note and get you guys going for the day. So at the outset, coming into today, I was curious to see how the Oilers were going to play things. We know they need to take care of Leon Draisaitl, that his extension that'll go into effect after this upcoming season is probably the most important decision the Oilers have to make going forward. We understand that Jeff Jackson is running the show as a general manager on an interim basis and that there's a lot of moving parts to take care of. But coming into today, we had heard the Oilers' plan was to try and sign at least 3 or 4 of their unrestricted free agents. And you got to remember, they went into this weekend of free agency with a lot of guys going to free agency. They didn't bring back everybody. Ryan McLeod is somebody they're going to have to figure out. That's going forward, not this season. But they made a few nice choices today. So starting with the faces they opted to bring back, getting Adam Henrique to come back at the number they did, getting Adam Henrique to come back on a 2-year deal for $3 million per year. That's about half of what he was making on his previous contract with the Ducks. Adam Henrique as the third line center, or in a pinch, a top 6 right or a top 6 wing. Slam dunk. The Oilers have the benefit right now of coming off of being in the Stanley Cup final. They can sell people. You get to play with Leon. You get to play with Connor. You take a little bit less money and help us out. Our team's going to be even better. And we're going to add you to the mix. So that definitely does matter. The fact that Henrique had said coming into free agency that he would be willing to take less money at this point in his career, because it's not about the money at this point. It's about trying to win a Stanley Cup. So kudos on being able to bring back Adam Henrique. Kudos on being able to bring back Mattias Janmark. For the first time since Janmark's entry-level contract, he got a multi-year deal. 3 years, $1.45 million. You can bet his Stanley Cup final and conference final, where him and Connor Brown, who we're going to get to in a second, absolutely cooked on the penalty kill. The Oilers put together one of the best penalty kills ever in the postseason this past run, keeping Janmark in the mix at a reasonable number and giving him a little bit more security based on how he had played this season. That's good for the vibes. Then Connor Brown, who I had just mentioned, same thing. They are going to have to deal with the cap penalty from last year's team, got pushed onto this year's team, the way that contract was set up with performance bonuses, where they're going to be paying him like $4.5 million total, because 3.5 from last year's deal got pushed to this year, plus the $1 million he's getting. Corey Perry got a raise. He got $1.15 million for 1 more year. I don't imagine Corey Perry is going to be an every game player if he's healthy. I imagine he's going to be a bit more of a spot starter, occasionally drawing in. You saw him in the playoffs, a healthy scratch quite a bit. So Corey Perry's one I was a little bit curious about, but they decided to bring him back. I can see why. Then they brought back Troy Stecher, who wasn't really in the mix for a playoff spot start, which at one point it kind of seemed like the Oilers were desperate for some relief on the back end. They ultimately decided to go with Philip Broberg because Stecher was injured, but Stecher as a volume guy, interesting idea that the Oilers chose to address the departure of Vincent Desharnais by bringing in two right-handed defensemen in Stetcher and then Joshua Brown, who we're going to get to in a minute. So the Oilers did take some swings today. And I know these weren't like big ticket guys. You know, last week I had talked to maybe Patrick Kane, maybe Jonathan Marchessault, but they took reasonable swings that I see the idea. I got the vision. You know, that's really all I ever ask from general managers is you don't need to tell me what you want to do, but I need to be able to understand what you're trying to do through your vision. Starting with Victor Arvidsson, coming off of an injury, somebody who has a track record of strong 5-on-5 play, who shoots the puck a ton, and has an above average career shooting percentage. All of those traits are stuff the Oilers need. The Oilers really couldn't find a wing other than Dylan Holloway to get going with Draisaitl during the playoffs. And I'm not here to excuse Draisaitl's lack of counting stat production, especially in the Stanley Cup final. But he does get the benefit of the doubt that he wasn't playing with as good of line mates as McDavid, and he also gets the benefit of the doubt he had to play a lot of minutes with Cody Ceci. So you give him Victor Arvidsson, who's got a documented track record of strong 5-on-5 play. And yes, the Oilers are taking a risk. Arvidsson only played 18 games in the regular season for the Kings last year. He's coming off of a back injury, which a back injury is a little bit different than a knee, than a wrist, than a hand. Back injury, that affects your mobility, your flexibility, so much of your game. But by all accounts, Arvidsson looked ready to go by the time the playoffs rolled around. He was pretty solid in the 18 regular season games he did play for the Kings down the backstretch. He had 14 or 15 points in 18 games. Forgot to search it out before coming on the air, but solid in the regular season. He played every game for the Kings in their first round series against the Oilers. And then the fun swing, adding Jeff Skinner to this team. And I'm going to take a sip of water here, so give me a sec. Jeff Skinner coming off of a buyout, very much in a similar position to what Matt Duchene did last year with the Stars. And Duchene did ultimately end up re-upping with the Stars based on having a good year there, stayed there. But Skinner chose to take a significant pay cut from his previous contract because he knew he was going to have to kind of prove himself again. I don't think there was anybody out there that was going to give Jeff Skinner what he got on his last contract with the Sabres, but this is an opportunity for Jeff Skinner to come to Edmonton and really use his one skill. Jeff Skinner, Stuart Skinner. It's going to get hairy with all of the same names. A lot of Connors, a lot of Ryans, a lot of Micks. But adding Jeff Skinner to this team, good skater in a straight line, doesn't forecheck, doesn't play defense. Good skater, good shooter. You let him ride shotgun with Leon or with Connor, good chance you can get a 7th 30-goal season out of Jeff Skinner. This is somebody with 6 career 30-goal seasons, somebody who bounced back nicely in Buffalo, not this past season, the one before that, coming off of a real stinker year when he played that one year with Taylor Hall and Jack Eichel. But the Oilers are at a point where, because they are close to being a Stanley Cup contender, they can convince guys to come here on short-term deals, to take less money, and say, if you come, you take less money, we can take care of more guys, and we can have a better overall team. The Oilers still probably need to add one more forward to this team. They still need to figure out what they're going to do with Dylan Holloway. I imagine he's going to get the shaft, basically, because he's non-arbitration eligible. He's going to get a pretty hard bargain. Ditto Philip Broberg, because the Oilers are going to need to maximize as much space as they possibly can. Real quick, there was some rumor out there that the Oilers had tried to find trade partners for both Evander Kane and Cody Ceci. Not sure how tangible any real movement on either player was. Kane has a full no movement clause, so unless he wants to go somewhere, the Oilers are really going to have to cajole him into wanting to leave. And then with Ceci, he's not terribly overpaid, but the Oilers do need to save money, and giving a guy who's replacement level, probably a little bit below replacement level, $2.5 million per year, that's just a little too cost prohibitive. But they do have a hole on the right side of their back end. So that'll just about do it for this first segment. Going to take a quick break, then we're going to come back. We're going to talk about free agency at large and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the basketball and hockey playoffs are over, we have fewer options. We've only got baseball. We've only got the WNBA. Sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app, dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. Me personally, I'm a big proponent. I love throwing 2 or 3 guys in an anytime home run parlay. Gives me something to be a little more invested in on a weeknight when the Mets might not be playing, or I'm just bored and would like a little action to keep me invested. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank everybody making Locked On Oilers a part of their Tuesday, whether it's first thing in the morning, on the way to work, on the way to school. If you're a masochist, you're working out first thing in the morning at the gym. Thanks for making Locked On Oilers part of your morning routine. Or if it's the end of the day, you're decompressing and you know the Oilers did a bunch of stuff yesterday, but didn't get a chance to look because you were busy. And yes, I know it was Canada Day. You were probably off, but if you were busy, at the lake, having a few adult beverages, you might not have been as in tune with the transactions as you normally would have. So thank you for choosing Locked On Oilers to get up to speed. So free agency at large in hockey is very different than the other sports. Because there is so little money in the system relative to the other sports, you go look at what the salary cap is in the NBA and the NFL, or what the luxury tax threshold is in the Major League Baseball. There are guys who got contracts in NBA free agency who could bankroll like 2 NHL teams with their total earnings of a given contract. Jason Tatum's contract, over the course of the lifespan of that contract, he'll have enough to pay out 2 full team salary caps. That's a lot of money in comparison to where hockey is at. So the first thing you got to keep in mind, most teams, when they are going to free agency, they are trying to solve problems. I rather look at free agency as an opportunity to plug holes. I don't think you're going to find major solutions to your problems in free agency, because the way the contracts are structured in the NHL, the only players who get to free agency are older and more expensive. You don't get the LeBron decision in the NHL. Connor McDavid's not going to market. Leon Draisaitl is not going to market. The best player who got to free agency, actual free agency, was Steven Stamkos. Or Jonathan Marchessault, depending on which of those players you like the most. I was going to say Jake Gensel, but then I remembered because Carolina traded his rights to Tampa Bay, he technically never got to market. So Steven Stamkos is 34 years old. This is not 2016 where Stamkos was about to enter the prime of his career and, he was the captain on a team that won 2 Stanley Cups, even though he only played the 1 game in the first Cup final run. Stamkos is a good player. He is not the caliber of player that gets available in the other sports in free agency. Football's a little bit different, where quarterbacks don't typically get there because quarterback is such an important position that teams will talk themselves into giving out the money. But that's what you see typically on day one of free agency. You see teams who are desperate for some credibility, trying to buy credibility from other players. When you're a team like Seattle, you see Chandler Stevenson, who won a Stanley Cup with Vegas, who fits what you like to do identity-wise, where you forecheck, you cycle, and he's really about that, even though he didn't have good impacts playing with Mark Stone. So that contract jumps out in particular, something that might not age particularly well. But the big thing with free agency is you are almost always going to overpay to get those guys in your building, because when they get to free agency, for the most part, players get 1 or 2 real chances to cash out. You got to remember, the way contracts work in the NHL, you are not eligible for unrestricted free agency until you are 27 years old or you have played 9 years in the NHL. That is a long time. At that point, most guys who are good, they get the long-term deal after their first restricted free agent contract or after their second restricted free agent contract. Most guys do not get to unrestricted free agency, especially good players, because teams are going to prioritize buying those age 24, 25, and 26 seasons Those are the peak value years of a player. Later that you get, the less valuable they become because players' defense does start to deteriorate because you do start making business decisions. The later you get into your career, the more you're going to focus on offense because offense is what's going to get used for or against you when it comes to negotiating that next contract. For what Nashville wanted to do, I get it. Nashville wants to get out of that soggy middle. I don't think Marchessault, Stamkos, and Shea puts them in the contender tier. I think it might leapfrog them over the other middleweights of the West. I think that makes them better than the Kings. I think maybe if the Canucks take a step back, the Predators could be better than the Canucks. I struggle to see them being better than the Stars or the Oilers or even the Jets, frankly. Colorado, I think, is in a very weird spot where they are really top heavy. They don't have a lot of cap room and they don't have a lot of opportunities to improve their team. That said, I like what I saw from the way the Oilers approached free agency. They signed a lot of guys to short-term deals. They got most of them, other than Corey Perry, frankly. I think all of these contracts are reasonable numbers-wise. Maybe Janmark you don't want to go 3 years on, but we're splitting hairs. We're not talking about a lot of money. The Oilers can hide some of that money in the AHL and get rid of Janmark if he really starts to stink up the joint. So that's not really a big concern. The Oilers went into free agency with the mindset of, okay, we need to find better complementary pieces to our stars. They still have a hole on the back end. I do think they need to find a way to get another defenseman. That does likely mean trying to find a way to convince Evander Kane he needs to go. Evander Kane has no initiative or reason to help the Oilers. It does not benefit him to get traded from a team that made the Stanley Cup final. And I know he has got a reputation for being difficult, for being problematic, and he very well could tell the Oilers to shove it and say, I'm staying here no matter what, and force the Oilers' hand. I don't think that's a contract you would see get claimed on waivers. I think if you eat that contract and buy it out, you're going to be dealing with the penalty for quite a while. And ditto with Darnell Nurse. Nobody's claiming that contract if the Oilers were to put him on waivers. Nobody's trading for that contract. If anything, the Oilers would probably have to give up multiple draft picks or a roster player to convince another team to take that contract. So with that in mind, it's hard to be mad about what the Oilers have done. They still have to take care of Draisaitl. They have to figure out Holloway. They have to figure out Broberg. But adding Skinner, adding Arvidsson at the numbers they got them at, not quite slam dunks, but pretty easy to see the vision. I struggle to imagine Jeff Skinner won't have at least 25 goals playing with Leon a full season. I think Arvidsson very easily can be a 50-60 point forward on playing with Draisaitl and then sneaking on to the second power play and getting some opportunities there, even though that second power play unit doesn't get a lot of ice time. The vision, it makes a lot of sense. They went for upside and potential where if Skinner pops off, if Arvidsson pops off, those guys can walk away in a year or two, 2 years in Arvidsson's case, 1 year in Skinner's case, and then they can go get paid by someone else because the Oilers are not in a position to throw out huge numbers in free agency because they have to prioritize their stars. They got to figure out Draisaitl. They got to figure out Bouchard. And then they got to be ready for McDavid a couple years from now. So once they rectify that and we see where the salary cap's at 2 years from now, then you can start to have a conversation of, well, they had money. Why didn't they go after player X? They don't have a lot of money. So the fact that they were able to get these guys on the numbers they were on, really encouraging stuff. Unfortunately, we are going to take one more quick break, and then we're going to pivot to some unpleasant stuff. So be sure to stick around. Be right back after this. Thank you to everybody who is listening to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And I hate to end the show on a bad note, but I would feel gross about not talking about the Oilers being linked to Stan Bowman. I assume if you are listening to Locked On Oilers, you're a real hockey fan. I will assume you haven't been living under a rock. You understand why Stan Bowman, why Joel Quenneville, and why Al McKissick have been banned from the NHL for the last few seasons. You understand the heinousness and the callousness that Kyle Beach was treated with and how unserious they took what happened to Kyle Beach because they allowed Brad Aldrich to stay in his job. They wrote a favorable performance review at the end of that season. and they did not take that situation seriously enough. And because of that, it led to sexual assault of a child in the state of Michigan. Under no circumstances should the NHL have allowed any of these three men to ever be reinstated. To see the Oilers linked to Stan Bowman made my stomach churn. This is not somebody you want in your organization. You want to say guys deserve second chances. You want to say people learn from their mistakes. Until I know what Stan Bowman actually had to do as part of this reconciliation process, I'm going to take that with a real grain of salt, because because Quenneville, because McKissick, all three of those guys, as soon as they lost their jobs 3 years ago, Quenneville very forcefully was, I don't understand why I have to go, frankly. I don't think I did anything wrong. And you saw people with a vested interest in having access to Quenneville, putting him on their podcast, writing features about the steps he was taking to do better, to mooch access. Giving guys like that a forum to try and plead their case is the nastiest form of access journalism that exists. There is nothing to be gained from Joel Quenneville saying, well, I think I deserve another job. That's not your place. I don't feel like the NHL has learned anything from this situation. The NHL is the only league of the Big Four in North America that does not have a standardized sexual misconduct policy. It is entirely at the discretion of Commissioner Bettman to adjudicate rulings in that domain. That makes it where you don't have a standard, and it is entirely on the whim and the decision-making of Gary Bettman. I want to think the Oilers are only being linked to Stan Bowman as a means of trying to get his name out there, that Stan Bowman's agent is getting favors done for him by people in hockey media. I really hope the Oilers are not going to do this, because number one, you just had your best season as a franchise in 18 years, and you're going to go into this next era post Ken Holland by trying to recapture the magic of a team that Stan Bowman mismanaged into the ground and, oh yeah, covered up a sexual assault for. There is no world in which you can justify bringing in Stan Bowman. You saw how good a job Jeff Jackson did today. And I struggle to imagine there isn't somebody who's a better person than Stan Bowman who can do this job right now. There are a lot of able-bodied and able-minded people who would be able to do this job, who deserve an opportunity. And instead, you're getting linked to a guy who was a party to covering up a crime. I am hoping this is just conjecture. I am hoping in my heart of hearts that Bowman, that McKissick, that Quenneville, that all 32 teams are going to look around at each other and say, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want to deal with that. I am hopeful that this will go similar to the Mitchell Miller situation, where if you don't remember, Mitchell Miller was a prospect that was drafted by the Arizona Coyotes a couple years ago. Really quickly came to light that he had abused an intellectually disabled person when he was in high school, had to do serious had serious criminal charges against him, had to do community service, a whole bunch of things as a teenager. The Coyotes rescinded their draft pick, and then the Bruins, thinking they could rectify and will make him better, signed him. And then after widespread public outcry, and Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron both saying, we don't think this guy should be in this team, they did the right thing. I hope it does not take the Oilers being shamed into doing the right thing. You should not know party of Stan Bowman. And I know there will be people who listen to me saying this and say, well, Nick, he won 3 Stanley Cups. Don't you want the Oilers to win the Stanley Cup? Don't you think he deserves a second chance? And to that, I will say, if this were simply a bad general manager, if this were simply Peter Chiarelli, or I'm trying to think of another bad general manager. If this were Peter Chiarelli, I wouldn't want him, especially considering, the Oilers had already done the Peter Chiarelli experience one time. But if I were another NHL team, if I were let's say I was the Blue Jackets who needed a GM this offseason. I was the Senators who needed a GM last fall when they fired Eugene Melnyk after all those years. If you wanted to bring in Peter Chiarelli, I would have laughed and said you were dumb, but I wouldn't call you like reprehensible. I wouldn't question your character and your priorities. And it's a real concern because under Ken Holland, the Oilers did show they didn't particularly care. Giving Evander Kane a lifeline because the Oilers were desperate for a top 6 forward and then giving him a long-term contract extension, that showed you what the Oilers prioritized. They said, yes, what he did was bad, but he's good at hockey, so we'll suck it up. Ditto what they did with Corey Perry, who after the Blackhawks walked away and said, no, we don't want him on our team based on what he did. The Oilers said, we could use another forward. Why not? I want the Oilers to show me they are a model organization. I don't want it to come to a point where it takes the fan base shaming the Oilers into doing the right thing. I am hoping that their connection to Stan Bowman through conjecture in the media is entirely favor-based. It is entirely Stan Bowman's agent trying to get his name out there, link him to the Edmonton job so that other teams who may need front office people would consider him. I am very hopeful the Oilers will do the right thing here. I don't think it's a guarantee they do the right thing here because, unfortunately, this is professional sports. And if you might be able to help a team win, they will look past your indiscretions and then defend you for your past indiscretion. So I hate to end the show on a negative note, but seeing the Oilers linked to Stan Bowman after having their best season in 18 years, it really pissed me off. And it's really, frankly, embarrassing. You can do better than this. I promise, Edmonton. There are a lot of qualified people out there who would do a great job. Stan Bowman is neither a good person, nor is he going to do a particularly good job. Look at the level of delusion he lived in the end there in Chicago, trading for Marc-Andre Fleury, trading for Seth Jones, buying out bad players, trading away good players for nothing in return, trading away Artemi Panarin to get Brendan Saad back. This is not a good general manager. He drafted 3 Hall of Famers in Kane, Keith, and Taze, and then bungled away what should have won even more than they already did. He is not a good general manager. He is not a good person. Do the right thing. Don't force the fans to make you do the right thing. That will just about do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. So if you could be so kind, Apple Podcasts, Spotify users, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you were watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, leave me a comment. Which free agent signing did you like the best? Me personally, how can you not love Jeff Skinner? I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.